Hello, everyone. Welcome to Teacher Nolan's podcast. Today's podcast is The Election Process Around the World. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Teacher Nolan's English podcast. I'm Teacher Nolan, and today we're diving into a fascinating topic that shapes how countries are governed and how people have their voices heard, the election process. We'll talk about how elections work in different countries and compare these with the United States. As many of you already know, America had an election in 2024, so our election process has been in the news a lot recently. This is a great topic for practicing English, expanding your vocabulary, and learning about other cultures. So let's jump in. What are elections? First, let's start with the basics. Elections are a process where people choose their leaders or representatives. By voting, citizens get a say in who will represent their needs, make laws, and make decisions for the country. Countries around the world have different ways of holding elections, each one reflecting their culture, values, and government structures. Now let's talk about the election process in a few countries, starting with the United States. Elections in the United States. In the United States, elections happen every 2 to 4 years. Presidential elections, where voters choose the president, take place every 4 years. In addition to the president, voters elect members of Congress, senators, and representatives who also play important roles in the government. The U.S. has a two-party system, which means two main parties usually dominate elections: the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Although other parties exist, these two are the most popular. To win the presidency, a candidate must receive at least 270 out of 538 votes in a special system called the Electoral College. The Electoral College is unique because it means winning the popular vote, or the majority of individual votes, doesn't necessarily make someone president. The U.S. election system is known for being long and expensive. Candidates hold rallies, debates, and travel around the country to gain support. The process includes primary elections, where each party chooses its main candidate, and finally, the general election, when the country votes in November. Elections in the United Kingdom. Next, let's travel across the Atlantic Ocean to the United Kingdom. The UK has a parliamentary system, which means the government is led by the Parliament. The Parliament has two main parts: the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Elections for the House of Commons happen every 5 years, and people vote for their local representative, called a Member of Parliament or MP. Whichever political party wins the most seats usually forms the government, and their leader becomes the Prime Minister. So people don't directly vote for the Prime Minister, but their choice of MP helps decide which party leads. In the UK, they use a system called first past the post, which means that in each voting area, the candidate with the most votes wins, even if they don't have more than half of the votes. This makes the election process faster, but it can lead to situations where the winning party doesn't represent the majority of all voters. Elections in Japan. Now let's head over to Japan. Japan has a parliamentary system too, with a structure similar to the UK. But Japan's parliament, called the National Diet, has two houses: the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors. Elections for the House of Representatives happen every 4 years, while the House of Councillors has elections every 3 years for half of its members. Japanese people vote for both a local candidate and a political party. This system allows smaller parties to have more of a voice in government. The leader of the ruling party in the Diet usually becomes the Prime Minister. Like in the UK, Japanese citizens don't directly vote for their Prime Minister. Instead, they vote for the party and representative they think should lead, and that helps decide the Prime Minister. Elections in Brazil. Lastly, let's look at Brazil. Brazil is one of the largest countries in South America and has a presidential system similar to the United States. Brazilian citizens vote directly for their president every 4 years, and they can also vote to re-elect their president for one more term. Brazil has many political parties, which gives voters more choice, but it also means that no single party usually has all the power. The Brazilian president must work with the National Congress, which has two houses, just like the US. One unique part of Brazil's election system is that voting is mandatory for citizens between the ages of 18 and 70. If they don't vote, they could be fined or face other consequences. Voting is an important duty in Brazil, and the government wants everyone to participate. So as we can see, each country's election system is different. The US has a unique electoral college system, while the UK and Japan rely on parliaments to decide their leaders indirectly. Brazil combines a direct vote with multiple parties, and voting is required by law. Why do these differences exist? It often comes down to history, culture, and the specific needs of each country. But no matter how different they are, the goal of elections is always the same: to let people have a voice in how they are governed. All right, that's it for today's episode of Teacher Nolan's English podcast. I hope you enjoyed learning about the different ways countries hold elections. Remember, this is a great way to practice English while understanding the world a bit better. Before I sign off, if you haven't checked out my Patreon already, please check me out at Teacher Nolan on Patreon. Here you can sign up for my Patreon English course that can help you to improve English and learn about American culture. On my Patreon, you can also find transcripts, comprehension quizzes, grammar practice, and more. Patreon is a subscription-based service, and if you feel like my podcast is useful to your English learning, the Patreon membership will provide you with even more resources. See you next time at Teacher Nolan's podcast, where learning English can be fun.